a potentially catastrophic mistake, and avoid having us needing to spend sometimes several hours debugging a model. I'm going to show you an example of that once the model's built, how you can get a pound value or a div 0 error or a ref or pound ref error in the model. But for now, let's just run in manual calculation mode, which means anytime we want Excel to calculate, we need to hit the key F9. I'm going to start putting these up on the board like I said I would. So first one I'll put up is calculate F9. I'll put up a couple of the others that I used yesterday. Locking on a cell reference. Remember when we locked navigating? Remember navigating between tabs? Remember control page up, control page down. Right, again, I don't want you using the mouse, especially selecting on the tabs. You want to use control page up or down to move right or left across those tabs. If you're all set, click OK, close out of those menus, and we should get back to this instructions tab. All right, so let's review these assumptions that we're going to use in our model. All right, these are the assumptions that we're going to hard code into our assumptions tab. These will then drive our model. Now in the real world, chances are you're not going to get a nice, neat, and pretty assumptions sheet like this. You're going to either have to analyze the historical results of the company and figure out what you think is reasonable. You might have to talk to management. You might have to talk to senior bankers. You might have to do a combination of all three if you're building the forecast yourselves. All right, but for the purposes of class, for the purposes of homework, you'll have an instructions page, which is pretty easy to follow. So for the income statement, we're going to assume the following. We're going to assume, just like we did in the homework last night, revenue is going to grow 5% every year. And we know how to do this, so we're just going to set up a 5% revenue growth rate in our assumptions. We're going to assume the cost of goods sold is going to be 40% of revenues. 1 minus 0.4 or 40% is 60% gross margin. Depreciation as a percent of sales is going to be 2%, or I'm sorry, as a percentage of gross PP&E, it's going to be 2% every year. In this model, we're going to have no amortization. Right, but when we modify this model next week for leveraged buyouts, we're going to have some financing fees that need to get amortized. So we're still going to set up the model to be able to handle amortization. We're just going to have 0 in this case. That'll make more sense when we get into it. SG&A as a percent of sales will be 30% a year. We're assuming that SG&A is purely variable. All right, again, in the real world, you're probably going to see situations where you've got some fixed SG&A, some variable. In this model, we're going to try and keep it simple. We just want you to understand mechanics. We're assuming 30%. Other income or expense is going to be 0, and we're going to assume a 40% tax rate. And so those assumptions get us all the way through our income statement. And then as we had set up the model in the model tab, we're just going to work straight down. So the next statement we're going to work on is the balance sheet. And remember, I'm not going to have an explicit assumption for cash. Cash comes out of everything else that's happening in our model. It comes out of, it's the last line item on the cash flow statement becomes cash. So the first real assumption we need to make is accounts receivable. What we're going to assume is that accounts receivable will be collected in 30 days. Inventory will be turned over every 45 days. Other current assets will be $1 million. And we're going to have no amortization of goodwill. All right? And we shouldn't. We can't amortize goodwill anymore. That is, goodwill will stay flat every year in our forecast period. CapEx will be 5% of sales. We need that in the balance sheet, remember, to tell us what our gross PP&E is going to be. We can't calculate gross PP&E without knowing how much we're going to spend in CapEx. So that's why we've got that listed here. We also can't calculate it without knowing how much in asset dispositions we may have. In this case, it'll be 0. All right, but in any case, you always want to take into account asset dispositions in calculating gross PP&E. On the liability side, we're assuming the company pays its payables within 50 days. we're assuming accrued liabilities are going to be 3% of cost of goods sold. Other current liabilities will be 2% of COGS, and other liabilities, and these are other long-term liabilities, are just going to be $2 million. The equity section, common stocks, just going to stay flat at $10 million every year. We're not assuming any equity injections or equity withdrawals. Okay, and then the last few assumptions we need to make for our model, we need to understand what are the interest rates the company will be paying on its debt, and what is the amortization associated with some of their debt. On the interest rate side, we're assuming that the revolver and the term loan are going to float. They'll be floating rate debt, that is, they'll vary relative to some interest rate index. In this case, our interest rate index will be LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, and our spreads will be 200 basis points or 2% over LIBOR for the revolver, 2.5% or 250 basis points over LIBOR for the term loan. And we're assuming that LIBOR is going to increase 25 basis points every year. 25 basis points would be 0.25%. Right, basically 1/100th of a percent. Okay, interest earned on our cash, because a company, if they have excess cash, they can earn interest on that as well. Right, usually what a company will do is sweep its cash into an overnight account. They'll earn a little bit of extra money on that. And our interest earned on cash, that rate will also increase by 25 basis points a year. And then finally, the unsecured debt. The company's unsecured debt, their most junior debt, will have an interest rate, a fixed interest rate of 12%. So no matter what LIBOR does, no matter what any other interest rate index does, this debt will stay fixed at 12%. And then finally, our amortization. Remember, amortization means principal repayment. On the term loan, the company's going to pay down $20 million of principal per year. And on the unsecured debt, we're going to assume it's interest only. That is, there will be no pay down of principal during our forecast period. Now down below, we've given you also a very, very detailed set of instructions for entering these assumptions into the model and then integrating those assumptions into the model as well. All right. This is basically going to follow what we do in class. But when you get into your homework, this is always a good kind of reference to kind of have to the side if you're ever building projections, wanting to know what a step-by-step approach might look like. These can be helpful. But we're basically going to follow this detailed set of instructions as we build our model in class. All right, so I'm not going to review these line by line. We're just going to do them. All right, so those are the instructions. Next thing we need to do, we need to enter some of these assumptions into our Assumptions tab. So I'm going to Control Page down once. Will take me to the Assumptions tab, and we're going to start entering the assumptions. Right, so let's start entering in some of our assumptions. We're going to start at the very top for revenue growth rate and just work down until we've completed all the line items on this page. Right, so revenue growth rate in 2009, we said 5%. I'm going to enter a 5 and hit enter. And you'll see that we've pre-formatted this worksheet so that when you enter 5, it comes in blue. Right? In the model tab, pretty much everything is black, so if you start entering numbers and it's coming in black, you know that you should be setting up a link. Just the same way we've set up all of our other models. All right, so we'll enter 5 in year 1. The next thing I want to do is I want to enter 5 in each of these 4 successive years, 2010, 11, 12, and 13. Now I can manually enter these, but a far quicker way, because revenue growth we're assuming to be 5% in every year, I'm going to copy. I want to copy and paste this. It's quicker than manually entering data. All right, so there's basically 3 ways to copy and paste. The first way is using the mouse, and again, that's wrong. All right, I don't want you scrolling up here, finding your copy, which I don't even think that's copy. Yeah, copy, then going down here and selecting your range, and then go back up and finding your paste button. Right? That takes a lot of time, very, very inefficient. When you have to replicate that series of actions over and over hundreds or thousands of times, it adds tremendous amounts of time to your modeling. All right, so what I want to do, I can copy. The other two ways to copy are are greatly preferred. First way is to select the cell you want to copy, in this case H8, and hit Control C. All right, so copy, Control C. And when you hit Control C, you should see it start to flash. The outlines of the cell will start to flash a little bit. To paste, you need to just select the cells, the destination cells, in this case 2010, 11, 12, 13. I want to select these, and the way I selected these is I went to 2010 or I8, I held down my Shift key and used my right arrow key until this range was highlighted. And once you've highlighted where you want the data to be copied, you can hit Control V as in Victor to paste. Everyone able to follow that? You can also do a cut command. What's the shortcut for cut? Yeah. We don't really need to cut anything in this model, but if you ever need to, that's one that you can use pretty often. A lot of these, I know these at least work in, not just Excel, but Word and PowerPoint as well. They work in all the Microsoft Office programs. All right. So cut, Control X, copy, Control C, paste, Control V. All right. That's one way that's acceptable to copy and paste. All right. I want to show you the other, though. What I'm going to do is I'm going to undo what I just did. Who knows the shortcut for undoing something? Control Z. So to undo something, Control Z. And just for fun, what's the shortcut for redo something? Do you know that?
So Y?
Yeah, it's Control Y. Okay, so if you want to replicate the last command you did, you would hit Control Y. Okay, not something we're going to use right away, but we'll probably use that at some point. All right, the third way to copy something across is actually using something I call a fill, that not I call, but is called a fill command. All right, and a fill command basically would work like this. If I want to copy this cell, and I want to fill that into these cells out to the right, I can use a fill command, which is a little bit quicker than using copy and paste. The way to do this is if you go to the cell that you want to copy, and you hold down Shift, you can use your right arrow key to select the range into which you want to fill those contents. Again, you've got to have that cell as part of that range on the left side. Once you've selected the entire range, you can use the command Control R, fill right. And that's really useful. That is the quick way to copy something either to the right. You can also fill down. So to the right, fill right is Control R. Fill down, which we'll use a little bit later, is Control D, as in David. And that's the one, of the three that I showed you, that's probably the best one to use. Get used to using this fill command. It's quicker. Obviously, hitting Control R is quicker than hitting Control C, selecting where you want it to be pasted, then hitting Control V. All about saving keystrokes, all about being more efficient. Right? Investment bankers work very long hours as it is. The more time you can save, the better it's going to be. Next item, cost of goods sold as a percent of revenue, which we said was going to be 40%. So we'll enter 40. And just like we did a second ago, we're going to fill to the right. Next item, depreciation as a percent of gross PP&E. All right, remember in the instructions page we said 2%, so I'm going to enter 2 in this cell. And we said for amortization, remember we said 0. So I'm going to enter 0 here. Now you can also copy and paste multiple cells at a time. You can also fill multiple cells at a time. All right, so rather than entering 2, then filling right, then entering 0, then filling right, I can enter 2 and 0 and fill right just once on both of them. Okay, but just like the other cases in which we use the fill right command, when we select our range, both of these cells need to be selected at the leftmost section of that range. And again, you select that range, hold down Shift, use your arrow keys to select, 1 down and then 4 to the right. And then you can hit Control R on both of those. All right. SG&A, 30%. What did we say for other income or expense? Was that 0? Yeah. 0, and then a 40% tax rate. And then we can fill all 3 of those to the right as well. All right. Let's move down to the balance sheet. First item, accounts receivable days. Remember from our assumptions we said 30, we said 45 for inventory, 1 million for current assets, 0 for other assets. CapEx is a percent of sales. I'm just going to go all the way down to common stock, and then I'm going to fill all of these across to the right. Just use a fill right command once to save myself some time. All right, so we're just going to work straight down and then copy them across. CapEx as a percent of sales was 5%. 0 for asset dispositions. 50 days payable. 3% for accrued liabilities as a percent of cost of goods sold. 2% for other current liabilities as a percent of cost of goods sold. 2 million for other liabilities. 10 million for common stock. Once you have those, select that entire range, scroll over to the right, and you can use your fill right command again. If there are no questions, we're going to keep moving on. Now we're going to enter our interest rate assumptions. Remember what we said, we have 2 pieces of debt that float in relation to LIBOR. All right, the revolver is going to be priced at 200 basis points over LIBOR, the term loan 250 basis points over LIBOR. All right, so in order to know what these interest rates are going to be, we first need to know what LIBOR is. And remember from the assumptions, we said LIBOR is going to increase by 25 basis points a year. What we're going to do here is in cell H37, LIBOR for 2009, I'm going to say equals G37 plus 0.0025. You should get a result of 4.25%. Actually, before I copy this, what I want to do, this is currently formatted in blue. And the reality is this is actually a link. This is not a hard code. So we want to change the color of this to black. You can do this a couple ways. Again, you could use a mouse. I'm not going to get too worried if you use a mouse for this. All right, but you can also, to format cells, you can hit Control 1, and you'll get a pop-up. And then if you use your right arrow key, you can scroll over to the Font tab. And then you can tab all the way down until you get to Color, and you can select Automatic. All right. A lot of keystrokes involved in this. This is why I wouldn't get too concerned if you wanted to use your mouse here. All right, use your mouse. The way to use the mouse here is to go up to that little icon with an A with a line under it.